last 10 years have been exhilarating. For LeapFrog, we've gone from a world of an idea of serving millions and millions of emerging consumers to a world of 140 million people served by LeapFrog companies. Just last week, the World Bank president was talking about how we're moving from billions to trillions in this industry.
The most important thing over the last generation has been really the emergence of the developing world. If you look at the new wealth creation, clearly most of it is coming from the emerging world. And I would add to that in a much more sustainable way than before. I mean, look at what many of the, I would say, LeapFrog companies have been doing. In a significant number of cases, the proposition to the consumer has been deeply reinvented. You could not have served these customers before because, I mean, the tools at your disposal wouldn't have allowed you to make a proposition which would have made economic sense.
What's really been interesting about large parts of Asia has been the transition from large families controlling all parts of the economy to having this enormous set of young entrepreneurs which are developing innovative new businesses.
When we looked 10 years ago, you realised actually that if you lived in rural areas, you were excluded. If you were young, you were excluded. If you were a woman, you're more likely to be further excluded. As we've seen financial inclusion improve over the last 10 years, what we've seen is that all of those groups have basically been included, and a lot of that through some of the goods and services that LeapFrog portfolio companies provide.
If we look at financial inclusion, the world has changed. If you think that in most emerging economies, people don't have a bank account, and especially when we're looking at rural areas as well, there are no banks, the branches are generally in the towns. So if you live in a rural area, you really have got no access to financial services. But at the same time, that has changed tremendously over the last few years. There's been a 45% decrease of people not having access to financial services.
There's a process of transition that's happening from the customer getting a first-time loan and then a second-time loan and then a housing loan and a business loan and an education loan and so on and so forth. What's happening through this process is the customer is actually moving from informal segments to formal segments. And I think we would have really done our jobs, and I'd feel very happy hanging my shoes and going home if I knew this customer doesn't need me anymore. Till that customer needs me, and it may not be one customer, it could be millions of them. I think we have a job cut off.
That's right, it's definitely millions of them.
Millions. I'm not going home in a hurry.
When one looks at the role of the private sector in Africa, I think one's seeing a complete sea change. You kind of had this idea of development being something that governments did. Governments in Africa, both governments internationally, the kind of aid agencies, are all coming around to this idea that they've got to empower and embolden business to make the kinds of changes that Africa needs.
So when I look forward in terms of 10 years from now, what technology will do within the healthcare sector, it'll allow a lot more people to have access to healthcare. If you're a diabetic, for example, you can actually now go into a Good Life pharmacy, receive not only your medications, but also be able to get some medical tests done. You can actually connect directly to a doctor through a telemedicine platform. You can actually get a prescription through email. The impact of that process is that now you're actually receiving much better care outside of the hospital, and you can then go back to your life and have a healthcare system that actually works in a much better fashion for the patient.
The ability for us bringing the essential products and services, just the fact that over the next 10 years, the amount of impact that can have, just helping raise an enormous number of people, not just helping them get out of poverty, but helping them stay and actually move potentially to the next income class, I think, over the next 10 years. That's a realizable objective.
So the most important theme of the next decade in financial services and healthcare in the emerging markets will be the advent of 3 billion new smartphones in Asia and Africa, and all the possibilities that arise for healthcare and financial services companies as a result of that. There's a holy trinity of product, marketing and technology, and it's the companies that are getting those three areas to work in sync together. Those are the people that are building the big digital technology firms of the future.
Universal healthcare is now a very big trend across the markets where we've historically been investing in. So it's happening in India, happening in Indonesia, happening in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, South Africa. The reality is this has now created a big investment opportunity, not only in the public sector, but also in the private markets. These are places, again, where we have historically invested, both in terms of our financial services platform, but also within healthcare. So we continue to see ourselves as big investors in these markets and playing a very important role in terms of the transformation of the healthcare sector across both Asia and Africa.
So in the next decade, profit with purpose businesses are going to outperform significantly against more conventional businesses. Yes, this is just the start of the journey. And in the many days ahead, as profit with purpose becomes a business norm, we're going to see things we couldn't have imagined.
The next 10 years are going to remain quite fascinating. You can't ignore 70% of the world. There is investment opportunity there, and there's investment opportunity at scale. Over time, because of the scale which exists in these markets, if you're not participating, if you're not aware, if you're not involved, you're going to get taken by surprise. Companies which are successful here will become world beaters. It's just essential to be involved in it, to be part of it, and to participate in it.